Welcome, this is Doc Stars. This is a private video for our ivermectin list. I've got a squirrel in the background. So I wanted to give you some more information on what this is, how it was produced, what you can expect from it. So we use some pretty exotic tools and methods here. There is the application of Sternheimer's monoisotopic mass conversion technique. But I believe that SOS may have a solution to some of the problems that have occurred within there. Simple example, Joel Sternheimer, physicist, has one of the known methods for collecting the effective attributes of a substance in the form of a frequency which is scaled by divisions of 2 from the, like a very high bandwidth, down into the ULF, or within the human hearing threshold. So he's been very successful at that. He's commercialized that process. You see an effort and attempt globally with rife communities to apply the same basic technique, and there's often benefit there. There's also challenges in that when you divide by 2, it looks, from what we can see from the SOS perspective, that the signature profile, like the informational content that we're after, doesn't seem to carry every single octave to the same potency and effect level. And nobody in the research community seems to know why. And I suspect that, again, Sternheimer either himself doesn't know and he just lucked out by being able to get some of the right ones, or he didn't release his entire process. Now, in the past, I talked about how we might represent a frequency signature profile of a substance, not just by octave division, but by trying to transpose a octave value by other elements, such as constants. So, taking a look at Euler's constant, there could be applications of something as simple as pi in here, where we're essentially moving the signal. We're circulating the signal itself in a certain way across time and space. We're not just pushing it by divisions or multiplications by 2. So it looks like part of that idea caught on in the current global rife community, where there's an attempt to shift the octave value by another number. So there's been an attempt to do this with Euler's. Through related research I've been doing, I believe I found a potential solution and identified part of the problem in that the condensed sort of pure form of the informational content that should be getting passed to every octave is actually wrapping somehow. In other words, the content is there at some octaves, and if it was applied at that octave, you probably would get a reasonable effect. But you either have to know in advance or through vigorous testing which of those octaves is the most potent, or this energy is wrapping somehow between and outside of octaves. And so through some study and testing, I think I found a solution for that, like the reason that it's doing that and how to localize it. So that theoretical framework has been embedded into this frequency collection. And the framework does seem to be working pretty well in some other statistical applications, so I have high hopes for this. Let me know, for those of you that get this, what you see from your testing. But on top of all that, I had to do this video over again, so there's another 10-minute segment following after this one. It's related to what I'm talking about, so just hang in there. There's also something I've never talked about publicly, but it's always been part of the core research, and that's eidetic field information, or eidetics. And so, because I've been pilloried and like David Sarita type characters, trying to, take credit on content from my site, take credit for my work, essentially, like the ideas that I've had. So I'm just being a bit more protective. But the point is that shape of an object contains important information about its nature. And there isn't a lot of information in the general public, unfortunately, on the study of eidetics. I've been studying it pretty thoroughly for some time. But how that translates into our frequencies is that what we're doing is we're mapping the geometric form and terrain of the molecules themselves, in moved, rotated positions, across space. And then we're converting these shape footprints directly into sound, like sonification. We also have a multiplicity of psychoactive envelopes that are meant to, I've talked about this in other videos, but the idea is that if you can get a person into a state of, something like hypnosis or a psychoactive state, and then impart the shape information that this might elicit, there seems to be information out there that indicates that this is possible. And then we've got our proprietary Sound of Stars frequency technology that models modulations of the conscious state when exposed to the target, which we found to be really quite beneficial for people in the past. It's a winning technology so far, so I'm thankful for that. But the point is that I believe that the most potent attributes of ivermectin from a consciousness perspective has been isolated to an appropriate degree. This is also embedded into the tracks. So what we have here is a big collection of audio tracks that are suitable for listening. Also coil tracks, so silent delivery. In the comments section below, you'll find a bunch of links. I'll be talking to you about some of the current items you might use for silent delivery. I haven't talked about that much. I know a lot of you have been asking. We've tried different devices in the past. Pros and cons to a bunch of them. There are some, what would be nice is if you could use, if you wanted to experiment or test with these frequencies, you could set a coil up, close to you, when you're sleeping and just let it run through the night. That would be, this is what I am testing out and plan to be testing this more. It'd be great, if the frequencies worked in a reasonable degree. And as far as I can tell, this is probably one of the better chances or versions of such a thing that may exist or may exist at some point. What looks like is happening is that the informational content that's of interest to us is not being passed down perfectly by octave. It looks like what's happening is that the informational content is being passed by octave, but only at certain steps. And then what's happening is that the actual signature that we're wanting is being wrapped. So if you were to scale a really high frequency down by an enormous number of octaves, what you'd find is that there'd be certain steps along that travel path where the signature is present, there's not any distortion, and it probably has meaningful application. And then the rest of the informational content on octave steps where it doesn't seem to be present, it's that it's been shifted. And it's been shifted by certain kinds of values or constants. The reason that I believe this is because I was doing, I've been working on an intense project that requires a lot of statistical analysis, like an enormous amount. And it was a similar problem, and I found that there was something like that going on. And what was interesting was that when I took a look at what the current general Rife community approach was, it's not that it was an error, but it looks like it was simply a part and somewhat of a small part of the overall process. Now, I could be wrong about all this. I don't think I am. What I've also done is I've used a number of different methods, converging a number of different methods into these audio tracks. So in the collection of frequencies that we have, I've categorized them, like I said, so that some are for silent delivery. They're not really meant to be listened to audibly. You could listen to them if you wanted to, but they probably won't sound very pleasant. Then there's the audible versions. Now, I wanted to try to get as close to representing ivermectin and as accurate as possible that I knew about within my means and resources. And I think I've done a pretty good job. I think it's probably a better job than is out there as far as frequency renders go. Because a number of bottlenecks and hurdles, challenges that were in place, I believe have been overcome. So another example is there's lots of different tone generators out there. So it's really not that tough of a problem to figure out how to render an audible version of a substance, as long as you know the frequency that you're modeling, through like just a commonly available tone generator. You just have to have the numbers, essentially. I mean, to just, you know, do the basic job. But the problem is that for something like ivermectin, you want to have high precision, and you want to have like a complete picture of what it is. You know, there'd be like sort of like easy, simple ways to render this kind of thing, but I wanted to put in the extra elbow grease to make sure that it was as comprehensive as possible. So in this particular frequency collection, we're using extreme accuracy. So we've actually done the monoisotopic mass rather than just the standardized mass. And what that means is the precision to the right of the decimal point is very high. And there really aren't that many signal generators out there that have the capacity to map it that high. And then the other problem is that when you're rendering something like that, invariably you run into problems like distortion, sweep, drift. One of the biggest challenges is drift. So it's like you might try to render the frequency, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the envelope of the audio is taking properly. There's constraints in place with a lot of hardware and software tools. So I believe that's been solved. So we have an extremely accurate frequency representation for the isotropic mass of the substance. But then I also did a comprehensive geometric topology of the molecules involved themselves. So here if we're going to render ivermectin properly, then we need to understand that there's two molecules, ivermectin B1A and ivermectin B1B, and then they're in proportion to each other. The proportion is about 80 to 20%. So that means that if the audio signal is going to be, a good representation of the substance, it needs to be proportioned properly. One of the problems that we run into when we're doing molecular representation is that you usually have, you have a fundamental note, and you have a series of other notes that are related to the fundamental, and they have very specific relations, and often what you would call like a magnitudinal or power level associated between themselves and the fundamental. So in this particular case, the idea was represent those two molecules in relation to each other at the right proportion and magnitude. Then with the topology, what we literally did is we took a series of rotated 3D maps of this molecule, and then we sonified it. So one of the topics I haven't talked about much publicly is eidetics. So eidetics it's a form of capturing information through shape. And there's not a lot of research in the public domain on it. There's not a lot of work being done. It's not easy to track this stuff down. I've spent a long time studying it and trying to understand how it works. But the basic concept is that the nature of the shape of an object itself contains information inherent of the object. And so this has been modeled. And then we also have our SOS directives, so sound of stars frequencies. And with sound of stars frequencies, what we're doing is we're attempting to model something important about the consciousness state experienced by whatever the target is. So it's like, how would consciousness change if a conscious being was consuming ivermectin. Now I found something fascinating. I'm going to put the links in the bottom. By the way, all of these are overlaid, right? So we have audio tracks that have all of this information contained in it. But for those of you that know that I take a scientific view of astrology, I wanted to see if there was anything unique about ivermectin astrologically. It turns out that there is. So I studied some articles from an interesting blogger. These are pay-per-view articles. They've done a good job, and they studied the heck out of the aspects and everything else related to ivermectin. And as I was sifting through this content, I realized that the author was pinpointing, as far as consciousness goes, what the actual strengths were that were inherent in ivermectin itself. And then all I had to do was extract what those key points were and then represent them as frequencies. So in this collection, what we have is audible tracks that are composite layers of all of these different approaches together. And then we have, with the coil type tracks, these are monoisotopic mass values that are within the audible range but are designed for silent delivery. Now, bottom line is I don't know if these will work. I don't know if they do work. I don't know how well they'll perform. I have high hopes for this. Everything that I know that should work and is supposed to be able to work has been put into this collection. I intend to use this collection myself. I have people in my own immediate circle that this is going to be deployed for. It's speculation, it's experimentation. I'm not saying that you should substitute these frequencies for the real thing. I'm not making any claims that it can do anything that the real thing does. But what I am saying that is, as far as a frequency approach goes, generating something that can be listened to within the audible range and set up fairly easily in your home, this is probably a pretty good tool to experiment with. So, and if you do notice good effects, I would really appreciate the feedback. For something like this, it would be fantastic to be able to get some kind of access to a proper lab, do like blood terrain analysis, from exposure to the frequencies, that sort of thing. This was a lot of work. I had to get it done quickly. I felt like I should do it. There's a lot of bad stuff going on right now. I think I would have felt unhappy with myself if I didn't make the attempt. But anyway, look at the links below.